It was nearly 2 a.m. when I found myself alone in the hospital break room, the city lights flickering through the window. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, casting a pale glow over the linoleum floor and the battered table where I sat, folding my arms and staring at the steam rising from my mug. The world outside was silent, the city's usual chaos muffled by the hour in the thick glass. Across the room, Dr. Evan was hunched over a stack of charts, his pen moving in steady, practiced strokes. We'd worked together for years, always professional, always polite. He was the kind of doctor everyone trusted, calm in a crisis, gentle with patients, never raising his voice. I'd always admired that about him, even envied it a little. My own nerves sometimes got the better of me, especially on nights like this, when the ER felt like a pressure cooker and every second stretched out, taut and uncertain. Tonight, though, the hospital was quiet. The last trauma had been hours ago, and the only sounds were the distant beeps of monitors and the occasional squeak of a gurney wheel in the hallway. I should have been grateful for the lull, but instead I felt restless. My mind replaying the events of the day, the faces of patients I couldn't help, the words I wished I'd said. Evan looked up from his paperwork, his eyes meeting mine for a moment. He offered a tired smile, the kind that said, "We're almost through." I smiled back, feeling something flutter in my chest. I'd always liked his smile. It was rare, but when it appeared, it felt like a small gift. I stood and crossed to the counter, reaching for the coffee pot. The break room was small, barely big enough for the table and a couple of chairs, but it was a sanctuary on nights like this. I poured the last of the coffee into my mug, then reached for the sugar. At the same moment, Evan stood and moved toward the counter, his empty mug in hand. Our hands brushed as we both reached for the same coffee mug. For a second, neither of us pulled away. His fingers were warm, steady, and I felt a jolt of electricity run up my arm. I looked up, startled, and found him watching me, his expression unreadable. "Sorry," I murmured, but I didn't move my hand. He shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "No, I'm sorry. I should have let you go first." We stood there, hands still touching, the silence stretching between us. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of thunder outside. The city lights flickered again, casting shifting shadows across his face. I realized in that moment how much I'd come to rely on his steady presence. How many times had I looked for him in a crowded hallway, felt relief when I saw him at the nurse's station, trusted his judgment when everything else felt uncertain. I'd always told myself it was just professional respect, but now, with his hand on mine and the world narrowed to this small, quiet room, I wondered if it was something more. He let go first, stepping back and clearing his throat. "Long night," he said, his voice low. I nodded, pouring coffee into his mug and handing it to him. Our fingers brushed again, and this time I didn't pull away right away. He didn't either. "Thanks," he said, his eyes lingering on mine. We sat back down at the table, the silence between us comfortable, almost companionable. I sipped my coffee, watching the steam curl upward, and tried to steady my racing heart. "Do you ever get used to it?" I asked quietly, not sure what I meant. The night shifts, the exhaustion, the endless parade of patients and problems. Evan leaned back in his chair, cradling his mug in both hands. "I don't know. Some nights, it feels like I could do this forever. Other nights," he trailed off, his gaze drifting to the window. "Other nights, I wonder what I'm missing." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. "It's hard, isn't it? The way this job takes over your life." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt exposed, like he could see all the cracks I tried to hide. "Yeah," he said softly. "It is." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock. I thought about all the nights we'd spent like this, side by side but never really together. I wondered if he ever thought about me the way I thought about him. If he noticed the way my hands shook after a tough case. If he remembered the time I'd cried in the supply closet and he'd found me. offering a quiet word and a gentle touch on my shoulder. I wanted to ask him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I said, "Do you ever wish things were different?" He didn't answer right away. He set his mug down, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes. But then I think about all the people we help, and it feels worth it." I smiled, feeling a pang of affection. "You're a good doctor, Evan." He looked embarrassed, ducking his head. "You are too. One of the best," I laughed, the sound surprising in the quiet room. "You don't have to say that." He grinned, and for a moment, the years fell away. We were just two people, tired and a little lonely, sharing a moment in the middle of the night. The clock ticked on. I finished my coffee and stood, stretching my arms overhead. My back ached and I winced, rubbing at a knot in my shoulder. Evan stood too, concern flickering across his face. "You okay?" "Just stiff," I admitted. "Too many hours hunched over charts." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Turn around." I blinked, surprised, but did as he asked. He placed his hands gently on my shoulders, his thumbs pressing into the tight muscles. I closed my eyes, letting out a sigh as the tension melted away. "You're good at this," I murmured. He chuckled, his breath warm against my ear. "Years of practice. My sister used to make me give her back rubs when we were kids." I smiled, relaxing into his touch. For a moment, I let myself forget where we were, forget the hospital and the patients and the endless demands. It was just us, alone in the quiet, his hands steady and sure. After a while, he let go, and I turned to face him. We were standing close, closer than we'd ever been. I could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. "Thank you," I said softly. He nodded, his gaze lingering on my face. "Any time." We stood there, the air between us charged with something I couldn't name. I wanted to reach out, to touch his face, to close the distance between us. But I hesitated, afraid of what it might mean. He must have seen something in my eyes, because he stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should get back to work," he said, his voice rough. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. "Yeah, you're right." We gathered our things in silence, the moment slipping away like water through my fingers. I told myself it was for the best, that nothing could come of it, that we were colleagues and friends and nothing more. But as I walked back to the ER, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Patients came and went, the hours ticking by in a haze of activity. But every time I saw Evan, at the nurse's station, in the hallway, in the supply closet, I felt that same flutter in my chest, that same longing for something more. When the sun finally rose, painting the city in shades of gold and pink, I found myself back in the break room packing up my things. Evan was there too, gathering his coat and stethoscope. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the night hanging between us. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "You want to grab breakfast?" "I know a place that's open early." I hesitated, surprised by the invitation. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'd like that." We walked out together, the hospital fading behind us as we stepped into the cool morning air. The city was waking up, the streets filling with people and cars, and the promise of a new day. At the diner, we sat across from each other in a booth by the window, sipping coffee and sharing stories. The conversation was easy, the laughter coming more freely than it had in months. I felt lighter, happier, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. After breakfast, we walked back to our cars, the sun warm on our faces. We paused by my car, neither of us wanting to say goodbye. "Thanks for breakfast," I said, smiling up at him. He smiled back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Anytime." For a moment, I thought he might lean in, might kiss me right there in the parking lot. But he didn't. He just squeezed my hand, his touch lingering, and then he was gone. I watched him walk away, my heart pounding in my chest. The days that followed were different. We still worked together, still shared the same routines, but there was a new energy between us. a quiet understanding, a sense of possibility. We found reasons to linger in the break room, to share a laugh or a story, to brush hands as we passed each other in the hallway. One night, a week later, I found myself alone in the break room again, the city lights flickering through the window. I was lost in thought, staring at the steam rising from my mug, when Evan walked in. He didn't say anything, just sat down across from me, his eyes searching mine. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. I nodded, my heart racing. "All the time." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same longing in his eyes that I felt in my own. "Me neither," I whispered. He stood, moving around the table to stand beside me. He reached out, cupping my face in his hands, and for a moment the world fell away. There was only him, only us, only the quiet promise of something new. He kissed me, soft and slow, his lips gentle against mine. I melted into him, my arms wrapping around his waist, holding him close. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, smiling like fools. "I've wanted to do that for a long time," he admitted. "Me too," I said, laughing softly. We stood there holding each other, the city lights flickering outside, the hospital quiet around us. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I didn't know what the future would hold, didn't know if things would be easy or complicated or somewhere in between. But I knew in that moment that I wasn't alone. We walked back to the ER together, side by side, our hands brushing as we moved through the quiet halls. The night shift was almost over, but something new was just beginning, and as the sun rose over the city, painting the world in light, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready.